600,000 people, 12 kilometers of fortified walls, 15 massive gates, 80 palace rooms, 3 kilometers of carved stone reliefs telling the story of conquest after conquest. Built 2,700 years ago, this was Nineveh. The largest city the ancient world had ever seen, a megacity before the term even existed, the beating heart of the most feared empire on earth. And then it vanished, completely, so thoroughly erased from human memory that 200 years after its fall, Greek soldiers marched directly over its ruins. They set up camp on the mounds. They had no idea what lay beneath their feet. How do you lose an entire metropolis? And what did archaeologists find when they finally started digging? What they uncovered didn't just rewrite ancient history. It confirmed every terrifying detail the Bible had predicted, centuries before it happened. To understand what Nineveh really was, you have to understand the world it dominated. From roughly 850 to 612 BC, Assyria was the superpower. Not one among many, the one. They didn't just conquer territories, they terrorized them. Every nation from Egypt to Persia, from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Iran, trembled at the sound of Assyrian war drums. And Nineveh was their crown jewel. The Bible mentions this city more than any other foreign capital. Genesis, Jonah, Nahum, Zephaniah. 4 different books spanning over 1,000 years of history, all fixated on one place. Then they all call it the same thing, the Great City. But here's where things get interesting. In the book of Jonah, chapter 3, verse 3, we read something that made scholars scratch their heads for centuries. It says Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey. 3 days to cross a city? Think about that. The largest walled cities in the ancient world, Babylon, Thebes, even Rome at its height, were maybe 5 kilometers across. You could walk from one end to the other in a few hours, maybe half a day if you stopped for lunch. 3 days? Critics pointed to this verse as proof that Jonah was fiction, religious exaggeration, a fishtale in more ways than one. But what if we've been measuring the wrong thing? What if Nineveh didn't mean what we thought it meant? What if the Bible wasn't describing a city at all, but something we wouldn't even have a word for until the 20th century? To find the answer, we have to go back, not to the Assyrian kings, further, to a man named Nimrod, and a building project that would echo through millennia. Open your Bible to Genesis chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. Here we find the first mention of Nineveh in Scripture, and it comes with a detail that changes everything. The text tells us that Nimrod, described as a mighty one on the earth, went out from the land of Shinar into Assyria, and there he built not one city, but 4: Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calah, and Rezin. Then comes the crucial phrase. The Hebrew reads Ha'ir Hagadol, that is, the great city. For centuries, translators assumed this referred to Rezin, the last city mentioned. But look closer at the grammar, look at the structure. The phrase doesn't clearly attach to any single name. Some scholars now believe it refers to all 4 together. And here's the key that unlocks the mystery. The name Rehoboth-ir in Hebrew literally means the open spaces of the city, or the broad places. It's not describing a walled fortress. It's describing suburbs, urban sprawl, the residential and commercial zones that connect major centers. The Bible isn't listing 4 separate cities, It's describing a metropolitan complex. Now let's look at what archaeology has uncovered. Modern excavations have identified 4 major ancient sites in the region around Mosul, Iraq. Nineveh proper, the royal palace district, sits at Koyunjik and Nebi Yunus. 30 kilometers to the south rise Kala, known today as Nimrud, which served as a military and administrative capital. To the north is Khorsabad, where Sargon II built his own palace city. And between them, the connecting zones, the suburbs, Rehoboth, Ir. Measure the perimeter of this entire complex. Draw a line around all 4 centers and the territory between them. The total distance? Approximately 90 to 100 kilometers. At an average walking pace of 30 kilometers per day, which was standard for ancient travelers, that's exactly 3 days. The Bible wasn't exaggerating. We were thinking too small. When God spoke of Nineveh, he wasn't talking about the walls around the palace. He was talking about Greater Nineveh, the entire metropolitan region, the world's first megacity. Jonah wasn't walking across a town. He was walking across an urban sprawl the size of modern London. But knowing how big it was only raises more questions. How did they build it? And the answer involves technology that we didn't think existed for another 300 years. If you want to understand Nineveh at its peak, you need to meet the king who made it legendary. His name was Sennacherib, and yes, this is the same Sennacherib who appears in 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19, the one who besieged Jerusalem, the one whose army was struck down by the angel of the Lord in a single night. He returned from that campaign, humiliated, but he returned with something else too. Massive wealth plundered from the cities of Judah that did fall, places like Lachish. And he poured every bit of it into one obsession, making Nineveh the greatest city the world had ever seen. He called his masterpiece the Palace Without Rival. That wasn't poetic license, that was the official name, carved into the walls for everyone to read. And the numbers back up the boast. The southwest palace at Nineveh measured 500 meters by 250 meters, 80 rooms, halls so vast that entire modern houses could fit inside them. And lining those halls, 3 kilometers of carved stone reliefs, floor to ceiling, room after room. Every wall a canvas depicting military victories, royal hunts, religious ceremonies, and the systematic destruction of anyone who resisted Assyrian rule. Feel the cool of those stone corridors. Imagine the flickering torchlight playing across carved armies frozen mid-charge. Hear the echo of your footsteps on floors polished smooth by centuries of servants. This was power made visible. But Sennacherib wasn't done. In his inscriptions, he describes building something else, a garden. He calls it a wonder for all peoples. He says it mimicked the mountains of Amanus, filled with exotic trees and plants from across the empire, built beside the palace for his queen to enjoy. Now, here's where it gets controversial. For centuries, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon have been listed among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Every schoolchild learns about them. There's just one problem. Archaeologists have found no evidence of them at Babylon. None. Zero. The excavations have been extensive. The records of Nebuchadnezzar, who supposedly built them, say nothing about any gardens. Dr. Stephanie Daly of Oxford University proposed a radical solution. What if we've been looking in the wrong city? The descriptions of the Hanging Gardens match Sennacherib's garden at Nineveh almost exactly. The raised terraces, the exotic plants, and most importantly, the water system. Ancient sources describe the gardens being watered by some kind of mechanical device that raised water to the upper levels. Sennacherib's inscriptions describe bronze screws that lifted water in a rotating motion. This is the Archimedes screw, the same technology traditionally credited to the Greek mathematician Archimedes, who lived 300 years later. But wait, there's more. To supply water to this garden and to the entire megacity, Sennacherib constructed an aqueduct system stretching nearly 100 kilometers into the mountains. At a place called Jawan, archaeologists found the remains of a massive stone bridge, an aqueduct carrying water across a valley, carved into the limestone blocks, still legible after 27 centuries. I am Sennacherib, king of the wool, king of Assyria. I brought water from afar to the outskirts of Nineveh. This was built centuries before Rome constructed its famous aqueducts. Nineveh wasn't just big, it was technologically advanced in ways we're still discovering. But all this engineering required one thing above all else: resources. And Assyria had a very specific way of getting them. Let's return to the book of Jonah. Chapter 4, verse 11. The very last verse of the book. God is speaking. Jonah is angry that Nineveh has repented and been spared, and God responds with a question that has haunted readers for millennia. Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left. What does that mean? In Hebrew idiom, this phrase typically describes young children, those who haven't yet developed moral reasoning or basic directional awareness. Scholars estimate this refers to children roughly under 5 to 7 years old. Now do the math. If 120,000 represents only the young children, and if children made up approximately 20% of the population, as was common in ancient societies, then the total population of Nineveh would have been around 600,000 people. 600,000. In an age when most cities numbered in the tens of thousands at best. Let's put that in perspective. Babylon, at its absolute peak under Nebuchadnezzar after Nineveh fell, had perhaps 200,000 people. Thebes in Egypt, the great capital of the pharaohs, maybe 80,000. Classical Athens, 30 to 40,000. Nineveh was 2 to 3 times larger than any competitor. Archaeological evidence supports these numbers. An inscription found at Kala, just one city in the Nineveh metropolitan area, records a population of 69,574 people. Nineveh proper was significantly larger. But here's the question that should trouble us. How do you feed 600,000 people in the ancient world? You can't grow enough food locally. The agricultural technology doesn't exist. The irrigation systems, advanced as they were, couldn't support that kind of population through farming alone. The answer is brutal and simple. You don't grow it, you take it. The Assyrian economy was built on conquest. Every year, tribute flowed into Nineveh from dozens of subject nations. Gold, silver, grain, livestock, timber, and something else. People. Prisoners of war became slave labor. They quarried the stone. They carved the reliefs. They dug the canals. They built the infrastructure of their own oppression. This is the context for God's question to Jonah. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh. Now we understand why. This wasn't a town with a few sinners. This was the capital of a terror state, the headquarters of systematic brutality. And yet, 120,000 show kids, born into a system they didn't create, raised in a culture they didn't choose, knowing nothing else. Should I not pity them? God saw the children. But the prophet Nahum saw something else. He saw what those children would grow up to become, and what he described would make archaeologists' blood run cold, because they would find proof of every word. Nahum chapter 3, verse 1. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. City of blood. For centuries, skeptics dismissed this as prophetic hyperbole, religious propaganda from a conquered people exaggerating the sins of their oppressors. Then, Austin Henry Layard started digging, and the stones began to speak. Today, if you walk through the Assyrian galleries of the British Museum in London, you will see what Layard found. Thousands of carved stone panels, pulled from the ruins of Nineveh's palaces, and what they depict will turn your stomach. These weren't hidden in back rooms, they weren't private. They lined the main corridors of the palace, the throne room, the reception halls. Every foreign ambassador who came to pay tribute walked past these images. That was the point. The carvings show prisoners being flayed alive, the skin removed while they were still conscious. They show mass impalement, rows of stakes with bodies displayed as warnings. They show pyramids of severed heads stacked outside conquered cities. They show entire populations being marched into exile in chains, men, women, children, roped together like livestock. And here's what disturbs historians most. The Assyrians weren't ashamed of this. They were proud. They commissioned these carvings. They paid artists to immortalize these scenes in stone. They wanted everyone to know exactly what happened to those who resisted. This was state policy, psychological warfare refined to an art form. Nahum used a specific metaphor to describe Nineveh. He called it a lion's den. Where now is the lion's den, the place where they fed their young, where the lion and lioness went, and the cubs with nothing to fear. The lion killed enough for his cubs and strangled the prey for his mate, filling his lairs with the kill and his dens with the prey. Why lions? Because the lion was Assyria's national symbol. Their kings compared themselves to lions constantly. Inscriptions boast, "I am a lion, I am a man, I raged like a lion." The royal lion hunt was the most important ritual of Assyrian kingship, the king proving his power over nature by slaughtering lions in an arena. The reliefs depicting these hunts are considered masterpieces of ancient art. They're also deeply disturbing, showing wounded lions dragging paralyzed legs, blood pouring from their mouths, arrows bristling from their bodies. But nothing captures the soul of Assyria quite like one particular carving. It's called the Garden Party relief. It shows King Ashurbanipal and his queen relaxing in a beautiful garden. They recline on couches. Musicians play softly. Servants bring wine. Vines heavy with grapes provide shade. It looks almost peaceful. Almost. Look at the tree to the left of the queen's head. Something hangs from its branches. A human head. The head of King Tuman of Elam, rotting, while the royal couple dines. Civilization and savagery, beauty and horror, inseparable. This is what Nahum saw. This is what he condemned. And this is why God's judgment, when it came, would be absolute. In 627 BC, Ashurbanipal died. He was the last great king of Assyria, the one with the garden party, the one with the library, the one who pushed the empire to its greatest extent. And with his death, everything began to unravel. His sons fought for the throne. Civil war erupted. The military that had terrorized nations for centuries now turned on itself. And the conquered peoples, generations of them, nursing generations of hatred, saw their moment. An alliance formed, the kind that should have been impossible. Babylon to the south under King Nabopolassar, the Medes to the east under Cyaxares, the Scythians from the northern steppes. Enemies who had never cooperated before, united around a single goal: the destruction of Nineveh. In the spring of 612 BC, they marched. Now listen to what Nahum had written, decades before this happened. Chapter 1, verse 8. With an overwhelming flood he will make an end of Nineveh. Chapter 2, verse 6. The river gates are thrown open, and the palace collapses. Chapter 3, verse 13. Fire will devour your gate bars. Flood, then collapse, then fire, in that order. The siege lasted approximately 3 months, from May to August of 612 BC. For a city with walls as massive as Nineveh's, that's remarkably short. Something happened that the defenders couldn't have anticipated. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, drawing on older sources, records what occurred. There was an ancient prophecy, he says, that Nineveh would never fall unless the river became its enemy. That summer, the rains were unprecedented. The Tigris flooded. The Kosor River, which flowed directly through the center of Nineveh, rose beyond anything in memory. The water systems that Sennacherib had built to bring life to the city now brought death. A section of the wall collapsed. Ancient accounts say it was about 3 to 4 kilometers of fortification, just gone, washed away. Through that breach, the Allied armies poured. Archaeological excavations confirm the sequence. At the Adad Gate and other points along the eastern wall, excavators found layers of water-deposited sediment mixed with destruction debris. The flood came first, then the fire. The palace of Sennacherib shows evidence of intense burning. The alabaster reliefs, those 3 kilometers of carved stone, were subjected to such extreme heat that the calcium in the stone underwent chemical transformation. Many panels calcified, cracked, collapsed. Ironically, this destruction preserved something priceless. The Royal Library of Ashurbanipal contained tens of thousands of clay tablets, administrative records, literary texts, scientific documents. Unbaked clay crumbles over time, but the fire that destroyed the palace baked those tablets hard as pottery. They survived 26 centuries underground, waiting to tell their story. Nineveh fell. The king died in the frames, possibly by his own hand rather than face capture. And then something happened that's almost harder to explain than the destruction itself. Nothing. Nobody rebuilt. Nobody reoccupied. The greatest city in the world became a ghost town overnight. Within 200 years, the Greek soldier Xenophon led his mercenary army past the ruins. He saw the massive mounds. He noted the crumbling walls, but he had no idea what city this had been. He called it Mespila and assumed it belonged to the Medes. Nineveh hadn't just fallen, it had been erased. Nahum chapter 1 verse 14 had promised, "I will make you a grave, for you are vile." The city had become its own tomb. But Nahum been the only prophet who spoke about Nineveh's future. His contemporary, Zephaniah, added details so strange, so specific, that they seem almost random. Until you understand what happened. Zephaniah chapter 2, verses 13 through 15. He will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, leaving Nineveh utterly desolate and dry as the desert. Flocks and herds will lie down there, creatures of every kind. The desert owl and the screech owl will roost on her columns. Their hooting will echo through the windows. Rubble will fill the doorways. The beams of cedar will be exposed. This is the city that lived in safety and said to herself, "I am the one, and there is none besides me." What a ruin she has become, a lair for wild beasts. Everyone who passes by her scoffs and shakes their fists. Desert owls roosting on columns, wild animals making dens in the palace. Specific, strange, almost too detailed. Critics dismissed this for centuries. Then archaeologists began to understand what actually happened to the site. When Nineveh fell, its sophisticated water management system collapsed with it. The dams, the channels, the drainage systems that kept the Kosur River in check, all destroyed or abandoned. The result? The area around the ruins became marshland. Seasonal flooding created wetlands where the city had once stood. The stone foundations of palaces became islands in a swamp. And suddenly Zephaniah's strange prophecy makes perfect biological sense. Pelicans and cormorants, water birds, would thrive in the new marsh environment. Desert owls and screech owls would find ideal nesting sites in the ruined buildings. The Hebrew word translated as hedgehog or porcupine in some versions may refer to the bittern, a marsh bird known for its eerie, booming call echoing across desolate wetlands. Their hooting will echo through the windows. The ornate capitals of palace columns, those carved stone masterpieces that once held up roofs, would now lie horizontal in the rubble. Perfect platforms for nesting birds. Perfect shelter for small animals. Zephaniah wasn't guessing. He was describing a specific ecological transformation that would result from the city's destruction. An ecosystem shift that wouldn't become visible for decades after the conquest. And then there's the final phrase. Everyone who passes by her scoffs and shakes their fists. For over 2,000 years, this seemed almost ironic. Travelers didn't scoff at Nineveh. They didn't even recognize it. Caravan routes passed directly over the mounds. Merchants camped on top of Sennacherib's palace without knowing what lay beneath them. The contempt was so complete that people forgot there was anything to despise. Until 1847. That year, a young British adventurer named Austin Henry Layard began excavating the mounds at Koyunjik, across the Tigris from the city of Mosul. He wasn't sure what he would find. Within weeks, colossal stone figures began emerging from the earth. Winged bulls with human heads. Guardian spirits that once flanked palace doorways. Then came the reliefs. Room after room, mile after mile of carved stone. The entire history of Assyrian conquest rising from its grave. The palace without rival had been found. And now, finally, the prophecy could complete its cycle. Hidden for 25 centuries, Nineveh was revealed. The city of blood, exposed to the judgment of history. Every brutal scene carved by proud Assyrian artists now serves as evidence for the prosecution. The lions that once symbolized Assyrian terror now stare blankly from glass cases in London and Paris. The garden party relief hangs in a museum where millions of visitors look at Ashurbanipal's wine cup and Teoman's severed head and understand exactly what kind of empire this was. A city that once declared, "I am, and there is none besides me," exists now only as numbered artifacts in foreign collections. The transformation is complete. Glory to dust, terror to silence. empire to archaeology. And every detail, every single detail that Nahum and Zephaniah predicted came true. The flood, the fire, the animals in the ruins, the utter desolation. This isn't coincidence. This is the fingerprint of someone who knows the end from the beginning. Nineveh wasn't just a city, it was a test case, a test of mercy. When God sent Jonah, and they repented, and he relented. A test of justice, when they returned to blood, and he kept his word. The same God who cared about 120,000 children who didn't know their right hand from their left, also saw what those children would become. He gave them a chance. They squandered it. And now the archaeological record serves as the witness stand. Every boastful inscription, every brutal relief, every collapsed wall and burned palace, they all testify. God keeps his word. Every empire believes it will last forever. Nineveh had technology centuries ahead of its time, military might unmatched in the ancient world, wealth beyond imagination. They looked at their walls and their palaces and their armies and declared, "There is none besides me." The mounds of Koyunjik answer back across the centuries. Where are you now? Nineveh was not just the first megacity, it was a message, carved in stone, buried in sand, waiting 2,500 years for us to dig it up. And the message is simple: God keeps his word. What struck you most about Nineveh? The incredible engineering or the terrifying brutality? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video opened your eyes to something new about the Bible and archaeology, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started with these ancient mysteries.